Okay, here we are with another episode of Coffee with the Founder. Got my coffee cup, and of course, we have another outstanding guest here. Always nice to have a fellow Hawkeye in the house. Olivia Wilson. Olivia, we're doing these coffee talks as a way to introduce people to the work that the people in the WPC family, the WPC network are doing. A lot of times people see each other at conferences, like we met, at an event, but you don't really get to know who the person is and what their work is and what they're all about. So that's what we're trying to do. And we're so glad that Dr. Cohen was able to introduce us and get you on the show. So welcome. Let's just start by asking you, who are you and what do you do?
Sure thing. So I am first and foremost a music educator. So I have been teaching in various compartments of music education for 6 years, and then decided to go back and receive my master's degree at the University of Iowa. And there I kind of fell into a line of research that I think really aligns with whiteness and music education specifically, and kind of confronting and contending some of those systemic and inherent issues. And what we do as music educators and how, maybe we can grow and expand from there. So that's kind of been my background and work for the past, I guess now 8 years.
Yeah. So now help me out. When you say music educator, I come from the old school and I remember music teacher. Okay.
Yes.
So are those two terms synonymous? But also you mentioned whiteness and music educator. And I always remember the music teacher being white, many times the band director white. I mean, can you talk to us a little bit about how white is the music educator field?
Yeah, well, you ask some very important questions. Well, first and foremost, I think teacher and educator, just in my own personal philosophy, come from two different components, right? So I feel like and this is just, again, my own thoughts, but an educator, I feel like, embodies somebody who is constantly learning and growing. Sometimes I feel like if I were to compart myself into teaching, I am teaching students, but I also grow from them and I learn from them. And I think the education piece to music educator kind of allows or embodies that kind of philosophy for me. But then as you move into the whiteness within education, I think that there are a lot of ways. You kind of hit the nail on the head as far as, the statistic, I know it's high. I don't want to quote the wrong number here, but I know it's got to be close to around 80%, I think, of the teaching force is white. And then when you consider the growing diversity here within the United States, I mean, there's such a disproportionate, caveat there when you're in a classroom and you're working with diverse populations of students, and you might not identify, as the majority of what's within your classroom, or who is within your classroom. I think so for me, that element is something that I experienced in my teaching career, and is kind of one of the reasons why I have started to really dive into this work.
Yeah. Now, when I think about, of course, what you said is actually a little bit off. I think it's like 89%.
Higher. I knew it had to be higher.
So that was a good kind of, guess. I usually say to people 80% or more, which gives flexibility, but you're right on. And what I'm interested in knowing and wanted to ask you about is the curriculum. What I think about when I think about music education, particularly in high school, middle school, and I think about even some of the most diverse schools, that often those music education courses, music education classes, the band, the chorus, they're all, again, in line with those statistics we just mentioned, that talk about the makeup of the teachers, the educators. What's been your experience of what the curriculum, what the students, and what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish with your work?
Yeah. Again, very important question. I think so. I can speak directly to the choral side of things, since I primarily have been a choral director and an elementary music educator, though of course was trained in instrumental components throughout some of my career. But I can definitely speak as far as, middle school and high school choir. I mean, how we're trained, I think, in the collegiate level is kind of that foundational component where change really needs to start happening first and foremost. Because when you're looking at choral music, you think, or maybe I think a lot of people, majority would maybe think of, the classical realm, Eurocentric traditions of, Beethoven, Bach, just those standard tried and true pieces, which I think there's a lot of importance in teaching some of those components as far as sight reading and learning to read music. But I think we do our students a disservice when that's the only realm we're drawing from and implementing into our classroom. I think that other components such as rap, improvisation, there are so many other components within music education that allow for students to buy into what we're doing, as well as allow for them to have a little bit more say and creativity. I think are really key pieces that haven't always been at the forefront of the choral music classroom, but I think is a space where we could really grow as choral music educators, to start to allow for other genres and other kinds of music to be within our classrooms, that I think resonate with the diverse populations of students that we are teaching.
Yeah. So, in your experience in the choral music world,
Yeah.
what's been the reception to really transforming, being more inclusive, being more open in reference to the future of the curriculum, as well as possibly the student body and even the faculty?
So I think it's slow. I think change is slow. Um, of course, for me personally, I'm on fire with this idea. I mean, it's what I've spent the past 2 years, really diving into and researching and trying, especially so for me, at this current point within my career, I'm focusing a lot on general music practices because that's where I'd like to move into next, and that's kind of where my energy lies and my excitement and love for kids, which I honestly I think is extremely important because I'm setting those students up to hopefully go on to the choral classroom or to the band classroom. So I think decentralizing whiteness within the general music space kind of helps to open minds in those more inherent strict realms, I would say, in music. I think, especially in referencing choral and band directors, I think that the change or the openness to change is slow. Because I think when you're broaching on some of these topics, you kind of also have to work from within, or at least that's kind of what I've been finding in my own research and just speaking directly to my own whiteness. I mean, there are a lot of inherent components that I need to work on and that I need to, better and understand, to really enact some of the components of really changing what I'm doing. And I think that's where the uncomfortability, if that's even a word, lies. I think it's time for music educators to start becoming uncomfortable and start really looking at what they're doing and who they're educating. I mean, is it for the glory of yourself as an educator, or is it for the betterment of the students and really trying to capture them in the learning and teaching process?
Yeah. So, could you give me an example, just because this is so far away from my preview in reference to curriculum design,
Yeah.
curriculum transformation? If I wanted to decentralize whiteness, white supremacy from a music curriculum, could you give me an example, give us an example of what that would look like?
Sure thing. First and foremost, I want to name drop because there are some people that are doing this that are at the forefront of it, and I think that their voices speak louder than mine. So Brandy Pace, who is the founder of Decolonizing the Music Room, is just I've watched her present. She is incredible at really, I think she is at the center of bringing change to music education, and her voice is so important. And Amy Lewis is another idol of mine in music education that's really doing presentations on something called critical race theory in the music room, and combating whiteness, and leading teachers through that. So those two music educators, I think, are at the forefront. Before I say anything, I think that they are, if you haven't heard of them, you really should look them up, because they're fantastic. But drawing from those two music educators, from what I've learned from them, I think it's really important to first start asking these questions, right? So you take your curriculum and you start looking at, like, you look at the populations of students that you're working with, and try to maybe consider other songs. I think for a while, especially in general music, we've been singing songs that have some interesting past that might not always be, or should not always be, at the forefront in our music classrooms, like Jim Along Josie. And I mean, there's some songs that we have been doing that have some really tumultuous pasts. And I think we do our students a disservice when we don't teach about those pasts, and we just kind of brush over as, oh, that was just an unfortunate part of our US history. No, slavery really happened, and we need to acknowledge that. I think, and there's been I think in the way that music educators have been trained, those folk songs, I'm Kodai certified, I'm Kodai trained, which means that a lot of what I do relies on American folk songs, but I have a hard time in trying to define what is an American folk song. And when we try to compart that, who are we excluding? And I mean, I think that's the African American voice. And there are so many pieces of music that I don't think have been taught in their richness. That I think that is also a place where we can really start to bring change, is start again, putting ourselves in that uncomfortable place, but allowing ourselves to have those conversations with our students, and teach those moments, even if they make you uncomfortable.
Yeah, so help me understand, what would you say to a music educator or an administrator that says, hey, I'm in Tipton, Iowa, Brooklyn, Iowa,
Yeah.
Pella, Iowa, Norwalk, Iowa, Johnston, Iowa. I mean, places where maybe a little bit, but not very much, visible diversity there.
Yeah.
Why should I be teaching diversity in music when I don't have that many diverse students? What's your argument for shifting that curriculum when a lot of people are dealing with predominantly white audiences, especially in Iowa and across Iowa?
Well, because I think if you were to go anywhere outside of Iowa, well, and I shouldn't say that. There are spaces in Iowa, like Iowa City, I think, is really doing some great things as far as inclusion and starting to combat some of these inherent paradigms in education. And a lot of those educators are doing the work. They're doing the hard work, from what I have seen. But directly related to your question, I think it's so important for us to decentralize the whiteness in education, because there's so many other voices other than just white voices. And if you were, yes, there are spaces in Iowa that aren't as diverse, quote unquote. But I think that every student should learn that every voice matters and every person matters, not just the white narrative. And I mean, gosh, looking at the horrific story, of our news today, and not just today, but in the past, gosh, what, 15, 20, 30, 100 bajillion years? I mean, it's about time that education become inclusive, and celebratory of every single student voice. And I think that for a while, educators have said that they're doing that, but if you look at the curriculum we're propelling, I don't think it's always been that way. So I think we could do ourselves a really great service if we start to really think about, bringing every voice into the room, and not just, and again, I think, thinking specifically to elementary music education, there's a researcher named Juliet Hess who talks a lot about tourism in music education. And what she's saying in that is that, it's cute for elementary music educators. Maybe I'm sure you might remember those cute little performances about Black History Month, or about, the Hispanic culture, or about, different holidays, but then we just move on. So it's a cute little tour into, somebody else's life, and then we leave it as that. But I think it's important to centralize all of those voices throughout the entirety of the year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, if you were working with parents, I mean, what would be some of your strategies, ideas for helping parents to start early around the diversity of music? But let me first, though, ask you, can you just say, what is it that your work and research is doing? What are you trying to accomplish in the work and research you've been doing so far, and that you'll eventually be pursuing that doctorate degree in?
Sure thing. Actively right now, for my master's capstone, I created a culmination of resources, and I'm entitling it, as of right now, I'm entitling it Awakening Music Education, with the hope of growth for our field, because I think that we can all come together to do this. But I've at least tried to put together some sources to begin the process, because what I've gleaned from listening to people such as Amy Lewis, and reading and watching Brandy Pace, is that a lot of these music educators are coming from a space where they want change, they want to enact change, but are overwhelmed with where to begin. So I created of course, in this day and age, I created an Instagram account that's very small at the moment, but I am hoping, in that compartment, I linked a web page that organizes everything, and there's different sources on there that directly relate to whiteness and education, and how to begin combating that within yourself, and maybe why you should consider that. I cultivated a whole bunch of sources for children's books in the music room that decentralize whiteness. I also culminated some choral music resources that are composed by living female composers, African American composers, really anybody who doesn't identify as the typical white male composer. So I really tried to put at the forefront other people who are really doing great work within our field right now that might be overlooked. And I linked their websites so people could go directly to those sources and see who they are. And then I also created a whole document of research and linked those articles to the original publishers for folks who want to see the hard evidence and the research as to why they should be doing this and why is it important. And I've also organized them to the genre. So choral music, general music. I have a couple of instrumental sources, but I think I'm planning on growing that one.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you how you got to this point.
Sure.
How was there, I mean, something that moved you to get headed in this direction? But before that, parents, young people,
yes.
I mean, if a parent asks you, how do I start early? You mentioned books. I mean, are there some things, 2 or 3, some manageable things you would say to a parent of a young person that could allow them to not wait till middle school or high school?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I mean, just from my own background, utilizing some of those children's literacy, there are so many books at the forefront right now that are working on centering other people's voices other than the white narrative. And off the top of my head, All Are Welcome Here is a book that I love using. And there's a song that goes with it. And it kind of it broaches some of those hard conversations that need to be had. But there are so many others that I'm blanking on at the moment, but are in that list that I have linked. But honestly, I think I feel like using children's books in that way kind of opens up that ability for conversation in maybe a less aggressive format. But I think there's going to be a lot of pushback until, especially just, again, speaking from the white narrative, I think that there's a lot of pushback until you start working from within. So we've got to do that work and look at ourselves and who we are, and for the betterment, gosh, the betterment of society. We all need to start really looking at how we've propelled this exclusionary and oppressive paradigm, within all of the compartments of our life and what we do, not just in education.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be sure to link some of those resources to the interview, the Instagram account as well. And as you think more about those books, we'll get them added.
Sure
But
thing.
I was going to ask you, how did you get to this point? Where did the light bulb turn on? I mean, what helped you to kind of make this transition, and then it seems like make this become a part of the passion and the work that you do
Yeah.
for the rest of your life?
Yeah. Well, so I was teaching general music on the West Coast, and I was placed, of course, as a new hire. I was placed in what they considered to be the harder schools, of course, within the district, however you want to define that. And and I was teaching through the foundations that I'd always been taught in my undergraduate career in education and music education. I was drawing on those folk songs. I was trying to sing and do everything that I had been trained to do. And I mean, I want to talk about mass exodus. That was my classroom. The kids just they weren't the student population that I was working with was primarily Hispanic, and none of what I was doing was resonating with who they are. And so finally one day I asked them to teach me something. I was like, hey, you know what, I'm not doing us a service here. You obviously have some things you are passionate about. I'm going to give you guys a minute to work in groups and teach me something about your own culture or something that you've listened to recently. And I got a whole host of different, presentations. And from there, I started to realize, though, yes, there are certain spaces and importance for the folk songs that I had been trained to teach in my music practices, that shouldn't be the be all end all of what I'm doing. And I started to really look at, what were in those children's books I was singing, and I realized they were all white. I had no Hispanic literature at all. And I was like, and again, I think I'm not coming from a deficit mindset here. I'm not coming from, oh, my students were primarily all Hispanic, that's all I should teach them. I think, educators as a whole should be teaching the whole child and really utilizing a lot of different compartments. But if you're not centering some of those voices, especially the Hispanic voice or African American voice or what have you, I think it's hard for students to get excited because they don't see themselves in that. And I looked at my walls and saw I had all dead Eurocentric composers as the be all end all, when there are incredible living composers right now. So I really started to change up what I was doing, and I saw a huge difference in my student engagement. And I started to enjoy coming to work because I just, it was just so exciting to have them be excited to be in my room. So it was a whole learning process, and I still am deeply learning. So
Yeah, and now as you complete your master's and eventually will go on to get that PhD, but
yeah.
even now you can begin working with educators, teachers. What's your message to them? I mean, if folks are coming to you or emailing you or asking you, what can I do? I mean, what would be your message if you were able to send a little PSA to educators across the nation, music educators, music teachers across the nation? What
Yeah.
would be your message to them?
Well, I'd first say to embrace the unknown and sit in the uncomfortable again. I think that's the most important part, first and foremost, because change is never going to happen if you don't want it to happen or don't see why it should happen. And I think inherent whiteness is that realm where you've got your blinders on and you don't necessarily see all the ways that you could be exclusionary or oppressive. And I think a lot of people that are in education who identify as white want the best for their kids. They don't want to admit that they've caused harm. That's never a fun part And so for me, first and foremost, I think contending that first and doing that work is important. And I know Layla Saeed, I think is how you pronounce her name, puts forth an incredible resource on, I think it's entitled Me and White Supremacy. And it's a journaling component that's paired with a book that she's written where it kind of leads somebody who's new to this idea through why we should be working on this. And I think that's a great place for anyone to start, educator or not. Robin DiAngelo, of course, in her book, White Fragility, is another great place to begin because she talks about some of the history. But I think the second component, once you start working on that whiteness, is to also look at our history. So I have on my bookshelf right above my head, Stamped from the Beginning by Candy, is just rich with our history and some of the ways that we have been, some of the ways American culture has just been oppressive. So I think reading about our history is the next step. And then looking at your curriculum with that lens on and really looking at spaces to bring in different voices, maybe decenter others, and being open to that transition and that change.
Yeah. So can you just talk a little bit about COVID-19? I mean,
Yeah.
how are you doing in reference to the quarantine? But also as you look at the future of our country, education, I feel like music is the one thing that sometimes summarizes the moments we're in.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if you were noticing or seeing anything on the music scene that's kind of speaking to what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cool component of music, whatever caveat you're in, no matter general music, instrumental, choral, I think we have a really unique ability to bring people together. And I think people inherently draw to music, as that space to feel whole and to feel okay. And gosh, I mean, again, for me, thinking about COVID, it's been a challenge. I mean, I quickly had to put courses online because I'm teaching for the university as I finish up my master's degree. And so that was kind of a crazy shift, but I have seen at the forefront, music educators alike online have just been so incredible and fearless in completely changing some of the traditional formats and ways that they've been, providing education, and quickly, as if in overnight, shifting those to be all in an online format. And then the graciousness of them sharing all of these ideas. And I've seen teachers putting up YouTube videos, here's a how-to on how to do this, or let me help you with this. Or, I think the camaraderie across fields, music to art to PE to, other compartments of education. I mean, everybody's kind of just working together. And I think that is the only way we are going to move forward is working together and lifting each other up. And it's been really encouraging to be a part of that community and seeing the ways that people are really trying to embody that right now, I think is wonderful.
Yeah, so in your sense, the teacher preparation programs, particularly in the area of music education, is getting better about producing teacher educators with a broader skill set, a broader perspective?
Yeah, I think we are at a really exciting point, especially in music education, because of, gosh, there are so many researchers right now that are really, propelling why. Joyce McCall from Indiana, she is just dynamite, and her research is really critically analyzing some of the voices and spaces that have been excluded for so long in what we've been doing, especially at higher academia. And I think her research paired with a little bit of Ed Sareth and Juliet Hess are all starting to bring forth this conversation of inclusive music making and community music making. And I know my cohort professor, Dr. Cohen, is really, pushing that at the University of Iowa. you know, to stretch us as music educators to be ready for really any environment that we're teaching in, but then to also be ready as a music educator in whatever capacity to promote change and to understand its importance and its validity for, you know, really including every student in what we're doing.
Yeah, so that's exciting to feel like at least over the next 25 years, we may have some new
Yeah.
waves of thinking and new waves of folks who are thinking in ways that are different than the old waves, but we still have some old school folks in the
Yeah.
classrooms and music education, teacher education. What's your sense of the reception of a willingness to change from the current teacher educators, music educators?
I think I think I meet I think I meet a lot of pushback because of a lot of, I think it stems from two parts, right? The pushback that I've experienced in education typically comes from a space of, one, that educator maybe isn't ready to learn or wanting or willing to learn about those changes, and is just set in their ways. But I refuse to believe that has to be the only that's the be all end all. And I think having conversations and being open and receptive and not combative, but really trying to get to what I found most successful in those kinds of situations when you're talking with people, especially in education, who have been at it for, you know, 28, 30 years and are incredible educators. You know, I think when I meet those kinds of people, I always try to learn about who they are first, because sometimes understanding their background informs why they think the way that they do, and then, you know, trying to stem some of those connected, you know, experiences, and then trying to meet them where they are and hopefully encourage them for a possibility of openness to change. But again, the other important thing I've learned from doing this work is that you can't force someone to change. So all you can do is just keep putting yourself in these uncomfortable conversations and being open and honest and willing to learn more. And I think that's where all of us should be in a space for change and growth.
Yeah. So if you had an opportunity to speak to a group of, let's say, uh, um, I'm just going to do cisgendered male athletes,
Sure.
okay? And I speak just from my own experience because I would have never joined the choir.
Right.
I mean, it just feels like, I don't know,
Yeah.
not what a football guy would do, right? And it's one of the things as I look back on my career, I didn't play an instrument, I didn't participate in extracurriculars in that way, and I wish I did. I wish somebody would have came to give me the speech that you would give today.
Yeah.
And what would be that speech? What would you say to the football team, to the base, to a group of cisgender men, males, high school, middle school possibly, to encourage them to join the choir or to pick up an instrument? I mean, what are the values you would see or you could maybe foresee for them benefiting from participating in those activities?
Oh goodness. Well, first and foremost, I think I would start with that pushback right up front. And I think trying to be transparent with them and not talking down to them is really important. And creating that connectedness and explaining, I think, in the new age of music, whether it's choral, instrumental, general music, whatever caveat, I think that um, in a different way, not to avoid answering your question because I'm going to come right back to it, but I think you kind of highlight a very important caveat, which is, again, being open. So I would encourage those students to be open to something new, but then on the side of the educator to also, I mean, you're speaking to some issues of the teacher, right? So the reason why I feel like maybe you might not have wanted to partake in those kinds of musical learning experiences is because maybe they weren't inclusive to the things you were interested in. You know, maybe they weren't inclusive of whatever style, genre of music you enjoy. And I think when, and maybe, I don't mean to speak for you, so feel free to correct me here. But I feel like a lot of times students come at music and education in the sense of, oh, we're just going to sing old white guy songs and we're going to sing classical music and we're going to play classical music. And none of that really jives with who I am. So why would I do that? And I think there are so many new up and coming ways in music education to encompass every learner. And especially from the choral room, I always try to incorporate improvisation. I incorporate rapping and poetry. I incorporate other components, not just the typical score, to really try to give every student an opportunity to enjoy music in some way. So I think coming at it from that way, maybe for this group of guys, and making sure that they could see themselves in my room, and they maybe could get excited about something. And I might even ask them, hey, who do you listen to? What are some of your music idols? What do you enjoy? And of course, they'll probably throw out some inappropriate stuff, but they're kids. And, but hopefully there'll be some things that we could grow on, and, that could be molded into something that could be school appropriate, or exciting, or just a different take or a fresh take on music. I think that for so long we've been working from one realm, and it's about time we start to expand, and they could have their voices heard in my room. And I think that that's a big buy-in.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's some good stuff there. I want to ask you about your next 10 years of life. We know one of those things is the PhD, but I want to see what else is on the horizon. But first, can you tell us where to find the Instagram, about the Instagram account you created, and kind of how to find that, and
Sure
what's
thing.
on the horizon for you the next 10 years as you think about the next 10 years of your life?
Sure thing. Well, so if you're interested in checking out my Instagram, again, it's in its infancy, so I'm planning this summer to really put in some content there. But my links are already up, so people can start looking at that. And you find it through my Instagram handle is Mrs. Freeze Music Room. So it's Mrs. and then Freeze, Frees, and then Music Room, all one word. And I did that because I'm getting married this summer, so that's going to be my new name, and I was just excited about that. So that's where the name came from. But in the next 10 years, I definitely, again, see myself pursuing a PhD at some point. I don't know if that PhD will be in music education. I also feel very strongly, I think change needs to happen at the administrative level. So I've been toying with doing some work there, and I know Iowa has some incredible programs for PhDs that are alternative and different, that kind of marry what I'm interested in as far as just different components of whiteness within education, and the whole leadership component. But other than that, I'm hoping to get into an elementary music room. So I've got some interviews. So we'll see where I go as far as what I'll get to be teaching, hopefully next year. And I hope to do that for a while. I really do. Being in the master's degree, I've really missed working with kids. So I'm excited to be in the classroom for a little bit and work in the community.
All right, I'm going to ask you a couple music, theater-oriented questions and ask you to spend 15, 30 seconds responding to them.
Okay.
All right, kind of a lightning round, so to speak, before I ask you our last question. So the first thing is Taylor Swift or Miley Cyrus? Who you going with?
Oh, Taylor Swift, because she writes a lot of her own songs.
All right, all right. How about the Justin? You going with Justin Bieber or you going with Justin Timberlake?
Oh, Justin Timberlake, just old school, and that just comes from my childhood.
All right, all right. Are you gonna go with Beyonce or are you gonna go with Whitney Houston?
Oh no. Can I say both? I have to say, I regularly jam out to Beyonce. So I'll have to go with the Queen.
Okay. So what is your thought about Marshmello?
You know, it's good. He's got some good raps. I enjoy it.
I'm still fascinated by, you don't have to be seen, but you're so dang popular. That's just amazing.
Yeah.
Give me one of your uh, top 1 or 2 musicals that you've seen or want to see that's either out there or.
Oh man. Well, so I have to say my first musical was Wicked. So that'll probably be one of my first loves because it was my first time getting to see a musical. And I absolutely loved it. And then my dream musical would be Hamilton. I've tried to win tickets, I think, for 3 years now, and I haven't won tickets. So
Yeah. Wicked, I have not seen. Hamilton, I've been fortunate to see.
oh,
But Tina Turner, that's the best I've seen ever.
really? Oh, I'll have to add that to my list.
Gotta add that one to your list.
Definitely.
Speaking of your list, we've been collecting. What have you been watching? What have you been reading? What have you been listening to? Are there any things you've discovered in the pandemic that you would add to our list so we can share it on, this is what you should check out while you're quarantined, shelter in place, that you may not have thought of? It could be something that you learned something from or something that just takes you away. Any suggestion for our list?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I'm going to plug again Decolonizing the Music Room. They have a whole web page that centers different voices in the narrative and gives a lot of authenticity to certain components of music. And they have like their own podcast, and they've got all sorts of stuff for educators who really want to embark on this journey. So I thoroughly enjoy following them on social media, and learning from them has just been really great. Again, as far as watching goes, Just Mercy is probably the most recent movie I've watched, just because I watched it and then I started my capstone. But I mean, I want to talk incredible, and it's some hard but very true history as far as incarceration goes. I mean, I do a voluntary choir with Dr. Cohen in our prison, and that just was hard hitting to see. So that was probably my favorite movie at the moment. And as far as books, I'm in deep. I don't know if I could just share one. I'm currently reading, like literally sitting right here, is The Stand from the Beginning. And they did, let me grab that real fast. Ibram Kendi just did a whole revamp of this that is shorter, so it's not as thick. But I love this version because it's got a lot of truth in it, and it's got a lot of research that I think is important. So this book right here is probably my favorite read at this current time.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put it out there. Dr. Olivia Wilson.
Oh.
Sorry, my bad. Congratulations on the engagement, marriage. Dr. Olivia Wilson Freeze, however you decide to do that, we'll just show some love to both. Congratulations on that. Congratulations on your success thus far. And we're looking forward to continuing to hear more about the great work you're doing. And if you ever want to present at the White Privilege Conference or do some research projects together around issues of whiteness and music education, let us know. And we're looking forward to hearing more great things from you.
Yes, I would love that. I would be honored. Thank you.
All right, you be safe there in Iowa.
Yes.
And we'll definitely look forward to staying in touch. And thank you again. Take care.
Thank you.